Hi and welcome. So this time around, this quick tool review will be a little bit different than I normally do. Normally I'm reviewing tools. This time I'll be reviewing tools of the mind, or books. And I know with the internet out there, there's all kinds of wonderful sources of information. I try and make my channel one of those sources of information, but there's a lot of ways to find out things you don't know. But when I was a kid, there was no internet, and even BBSs weren't a thing yet. BBSs really weren't around till I started hitting the end of high school. So I didn't have access to that. So instead, I turned to the best source of information I had access to directly, which was my dad and books. And I still have a fondness for books these days. You sort of can hold them in your hand. They're visceral. I always have a book by my bedside table, and I try and read every night before I go to sleep for 15-20 minutes at least, and just add to my knowledge base. And so I have a love of books, and I've collected a bunch. I'm going to show you a small selection of books in the machinist realm that are very interesting and a lot of useful information in them. The first book I'll present is one of the most common recommendations I find of all channels, of YouTube channels out there. It's Foundations of Mechanical Accuracy by Wayne Moore of the Moore Tool Company. And they actually have 3 books, 2 of which are still available for purchase on their website. This one is the most famous of all of them, I think, or at least the most commonly mentioned. And it's an excellent book in that it has a ton of information in it. It is full of pictures, so you can try and gauge what they're describing in the text. I find that the pictures are outstanding, and the text is often a little bit more cryptic than it could be. But if you spend some time with it, there's a lot to be learned inside this book. They talk about starting from some real basic information, like how surface plates are flat and what you need to do to make a surface plate flat. Basically, the first part of the book, which is as far as I've gotten in the book so far, talks about all the techniques they had to acquire in order to make their jig grinders. It seems like the jig grinder would be a simple device to make, at least theoretically, but the practice, all the machining practices you have to master to get this thing to be as accurate as they are famed to be, there's a lot of tricks in there. And so they talk about things in and out of being not coplanar, and what flatness means, and the tools you need to acquire that, and how you can start from nothing like Tom Lipton showed, and you can make perfectly flat or arbitrarily accurate flat surfaces. So Tom started with 3 pieces of cast iron, and he machined them relatively flat, and then he proceeded to rub them against each other. And the 3-plane method, or the 3-part method, is a method to guarantee arbitrarily accurate flatness of devices, depending on how much work you want to put into it, by rubbing them together. So if you have three planes together, you rub A on B, then B on C, then C on A, and you keep going through that cycle, and you can make things as flat as you want. And that's how they made the first surface plates. You figure, where did you come up with that reference initially before you had all the really cool electronic measuring tools we have today? Starting with that sort of thing, and then how you build your tools to measure the other tools that you're trying to make. And this book sort of covers all of that. I haven't gotten to the end of it yet. They cover scraping, and they cover various metrology techniques like autocollimators, and using other gauges that you make with bluing and scraping to get your parts flat. A fantastic book to have in your collection. Like I said, it's something you've got to study. Don't expect to just sit down and immediately get everything they're saying, because it's not written that way. But it is written so that if you spend some time with it, you can get a tremendous amount out of it. Towards the back, which I haven't gotten to yet, it looks like they cover a lot more techniques for measuring and metrology, keeping the air in your room. So they're showing that often in a metrology lab, just keeping, say, your table to a certain temperature isn't everything you need. You need to have the temperature gradients from your room removed, and carefully designed labs have airflow so that they can purposely keep the air circulating so that you don't end up with the floor being really cool, the ceiling being really warm, and your surface plate having a differential temperature across its thickness. That totally screws up measurements when you try and become extremely precise. And they cover things like that, measurements, extremely accurate ways of dividing a circle, starting with simple ones to more complicated, and it's a highly recommended book. Next book is another Moore Tool Company one that's also currently available in a reprint. Holes, Contours, and Surfaces. I have not gotten to read this book yet. It's sitting in my stack of books to read, and it covers all the methods that the Moore Tool Company just had to work on over the years to develop the incredibly accurate jig grinders that they sell, and just learning precision metrology solutions on their own, because making a very round and a very accurately placed hole is much harder than it sounds like at the get-go. And like the other Moore book, this book is full of pictures, which is great because sometimes text doesn't help you accurately see what they're trying to help you visualize. So the picture, sometimes the picture is worth 1,000 words, and this book is full of them. And another really good example of a book that was from 1955 that still has a lot of relevance today. Next up is another Moore Tool Company book. The first one they published from 1946, at least this one is, and this book is covering precision hole location. And it's amazing that you could have an entire book dedicated to precision hole location, because again, accurately getting a hole perpendicular or at some specific angle in a part can involve a lot of knowledge and tricks to pull off. So this book I got mostly to peruse through when I get a chance, because like I've got this huge stack of books that I'm still trying to get through. This one is the first book. The Moore Tool Company does not currently sell this book. Boy, it even smells old. And another interesting book just to look through if you're interested. Next up is a book on the Handbook of Industrial Metrology. This book sort of follows in the vein of the Moore Tool books, teaching various methods of metrology, because let's be honest, you're not born knowing any of these things, and if you don't have access to someone who already knows to teach you, how do you learn them? You can try and figure it out on your own, but best to take advantage of the experience of the ages. So it starts with really simple tools. It actually starts explaining metrology and measuring and general concepts of measuring, but it starts with the really simple tools and explains what they are and how to use them. Things we've all seen, like small bore hole gauges and telescope gauges, the surface gauge and comparator, and basic levels. Then it goes on to how to use an optical comparator, and I have one, but there's no instructions on how to use it. It's not like someone was there to teach you all the tricks you can do with an optical comparator. Where do you learn that? Well, you either find a journeyman that can share his experience with you, or you got to figure it out on your own, or you find a book like this. It covers pneumatic comparators. I actually bought a pneumatic gauge a long time ago because I was curious about it. I got it for almost nothing. And the way it works is the size of this gauge is just a tiny bit under the dimensions that you're trying to measure, and you inject air into the top here, and it comes out here and pressurizes all the way around this the circumference here. It actually has 2 ports for the air, and then there's an electronic device that measures the air pressure, and when the air pressure, because as air is pressing past the material, it drags, so you build up back pressure. It can tell within a lot of accuracy how accurate the hole size is. So that was something I discovered kind of accidentally. If you hadn't been exposed to it, how would you ever know about it? And then there's optical interferometry. Interferometry is using the wavelength of light to measure features that are around the wavelength of light. So we're talking hundreds to thousands of nanometers. That allows you, and sometimes you can do part of a wavelength. And That maybe sound a little foreign, but laser interferometers and the extremely accurate bench measuring systems use this technique. It was developed a long time ago, and people have been spending a lot of years perfecting it. Also, Tom Lipton generated it with the optical flat on top of flat surfaces with the monocolored light, and you look at the fringe lines. Those fringe lines are caused by interference of the light. So when the wavelength of light the light going through the surface of the optical flat bounces off the material below and comes back up. If the space between the flat and the surface below is the distance of half a wavelength of light, they will cancel out and cause a dark line, and if it's somewhere in between, it'll cause a light or brighter line, and you can tell how flat a surface is from that, and this book goes into a lot of details on that. And finally, it goes into autocollimators, how they're put together, and some uses for them, and even how to make one. So I'm going to read more into that at some point in the future when I get time. And anyways, a useful book to have, and very interesting at the same time. Next up is a really old book that I actually read through most of it. It's a very easy read. Great explanations of this. This is, if you can't read it, it's Odell's Machinist Toolmaker's Handybook. It's embossed leather. It's a pretty nice book. A really old one, but again, a lot of the techniques and information here are still valid today, showing all the parts of a lathe from way back then. Obviously be driven by an overhead belt system, not a local motor, which just shows its age. 1941, 1942. So it covers basic measuring tools, lots and lots of good pictures, explanations of simple techniques like how to use a file properly, draw filing and all the ways to hold the file appropriately, different kind of lathes and the parts of lathes. And look, lantern tool posts. You can just tell the age of this book. That doesn't make a lot of the information any less valid. I actually dug into this section on gear and gear cutting because some of the other books I had talking about gear cutting were a lot less clear. This one actually did a very nice job. So a pretty handy book. It was fairly inexpensive and still very interesting and useful read. Next up is a book that is a reprint of a book from long ago. I don't know the original print date of the book. This is, like I said, a reprint, so it looks brand new, but obviously the pictures are really old. And they don't put the original print date in here. They just show the reprint dates. 1915, there you go. So the original book was from 1915, and I was flipping through this, and one thing that caught my interest right off the bat was for your surface grinder, how to set up grinding, dressing your wheel to grind very accurate profiles into a part, and using your surface grinding wheel as a forming tool. That chapter is a very interesting one, that with some knowledge that you can't necessarily find just anywhere. I mean, how many books are there out there about surface grinding techniques? Not a whole lot that I've been able to find. They may be out there, but I've looked and haven't run across any. So anyways, this one was pretty handy for that. Talking about machining basics, here is a good one. The Henry Ford Trade School, Dearborn, Michigan, Shop Theory, including some typed tests that the previous owner took, Mr. Elwood Spangler. That's a great name. Elwood Spangler. Covers basic trigonometry, tools of the time. Hey, look, no wrenches made in China there. Oh, micrometers and some more typed, and I don't know, maybe mimeographed or something, copies with another test. It's a cool book. Shows you how to use basic machinery of the time. What was the year of this guy? 1934, reprinted 1941, so it's around wartime. Covers some basic machines of the time. Boy, beautiful, weren't they? All you guys with old iron, I definitely get it. They are very pretty. Oh, lots of this guy's tests in here. That's a really cool bit of history. National Defense Training Program, Toledo, Ohio, Index to Shop Theory. Oh, that's the that's the index to this book about important things for defense training. Oh, look at that optical comparator. I didn't even know optical comparators were that old. Look at that. So that's one. Smaller version sitting right on top of that is one that's been reprinted a bunch of times, is the Starrett book for student machinists, and it covers a bunch of basic stuff. Hacksaw blades, using grinding methods to find out what a material is, looking at the sparks. So they show what the different sparks look like on different materials. That's a kind of a really useful bit right there that you don't just find anywhere. Charts, tables, basic explanations. Useful book to have around. This one's still for sale. Next up, going on more complexity in the training series, is tool and gauge work. And this is a really old book as well. But again, a lot of it still applies today. Copyright, latest one, 1923. And lots of pictures and just explanations of how to do things like bore extremely accurate holes, location, hole location, dovetail measuring. Here's showing pins above and below a dovetail, and includes the formulas for that if you don't want to figure out the trigonometry, which is really cool. There's the formulas. Oh, a microscope microscope fixture for accurately finding holes, fairly similar to some of the hole finding quill mounted devices we have today. I think microscopes are underrepresented in the machine tool world. I was listening to a podcast the other day where they were saying that microscopes mounted in an EDM machine or even a CNC machine can be really helpful in finding datum points. So something that's really old that still applies today. So this is just a book full of techniques there. Along that line is for the toolmaker's handbook. So tool and die makers are sort of considered the premium machinists in the machinist world for accuracy anyways, not necessarily for skill set, although it probably does include skill set, to be honest, but just making tools. And this is a book explaining a bunch of different techniques like cam design, appropriate cam design, which is very interesting, gear and gear cutting. Books on gear cutting are sort of few and far between. I have another book on gear cutting. This covers a lot. I bought this specifically for understanding gears a little bit better. There's one other book that I got at the same time, Gear Cutting Practice, Calvin and Stanley. And this one spends a lot of time explaining all the geometry of gears. They're surprisingly complicated, especially when you get in some of the more advanced gear forms. And there's also covers some of the machines used to make them and things like that. But what I really wanted to understand was the forms themselves and how they worked. That's another good book, originally printed in 1937. Shows you how valid some of that really old stuff is. Here is a book on a topic that is underrepresented in the books. I looked for jig and fixture books, and they're not very common. This was one of the few I could find. And it shows basically kinematic design and showing you how not to over constrain a part when you're mounting it, and talks about things that you may not have run across before in a normal home shop machinist environment. I mean, you probably have heard of drill bushings, but they're not very commonly used in a home shop environment, but in the manufacturing field, they're used a lot. And I guess with CNC machines, that sort of thing goes away a little bit. But this book talks all about different ways to fixture an item accurately and effectively without over constraining it. And by over constraining it, meaning if I have something preventing it from going in this direction, so something prevented the book from sliding towards my finger, adding a second something is fine because that prevents rotation around the finger, but adding a third something buys you nothing, and it's very likely that only 2 of the 3 will actually make contact. That would be over constrained in that direction. And so this book covers all that sort of thing about fixturing design, which I personally am very interested in and wish there were more books to pull from. Then we jump up to yet another version of of building tools and tool making, building scientific apparatus. And I heard about this book. This book is quite expensive, but I did find that if you buy it overseas, the same book costs a lot less. And this book goes into a lot more formulaic information, but all sorts of techniques of making different scientific apparatuses, vacuums and how to deal with vacuums. Vacuums may seem trivial, sort of like building the opposite of and easier than building a pressurized system like the output of a compressor, except that vacuums have all kinds of other problems that have to be taken into consideration. Like number one, the materials used in the vacuum path tend to outgas because, believe it or not, gases dissolve into materials all the time, up into and including metals. And so when you start to try and pump down the vacuum, if the materials start outgassing, it can cause you all kinds of problems. You can never get down to fine vacuum. So this book covers vacuum system design. It covers interferometry, imaging systems. So I think there's enough information here to help me work on an autocollimator, which I would like to build at some point in time as one of my projects. It covers lasers and their uses and limitations. It's a pretty neat book. If you're just interested in learning a whole bunch of esoteric topics, it's a pretty cool one to have. Unfortunately, it's kind of expensive. Next up, if you want to dig kind of deep, and I mean you're not afraid of math, this is a book on mechanical engineering design used for a mechanical engineering course at university level. And I bought this book because there's a YouTube series, there's a YouTube channel that uses this book as their base book for the channel, so you can follow along in the book. This is going to be very formula heavy, but if you want to learn a particular topic in depth, this might be a good approach for you. Again, it is sort of mathematically deep, but this is kind of an interesting. By the way, you notice this is the special Indian edition, because this book in the United States was something like 200 bucks. I forget, something like 200 bucks. I got it for something like 60, 70 bucks overseas, or maybe it was 100 bucks, but half price more or less. And if you're wondering where I did that, Abe Books is a group. It's sort of an internet site where lots of used bookstores sell all their wares. This is actually a brand new conditioned book. I found it on Abe Books over in India. However, there is a risk to doing that because I bought another book that I have yet to receive, and I ordered it in 2020, but it keeps getting lost or not shipped or whatever the case is. I'm still waiting for it. So there is a risk ordering overseas, but the benefit is you can get some really nice books inexpensively. This next book is from U.S. Steel, and it leads into the next topic that you may or may not be interested in. I'm interested in all things machining. This is how steel gets made. This book is also reasonably old, so there are probably some modern improvements. This is 1951. The thing I love about these old books, this goes into the process of how steel is made, and they've got these really cool pull-out pages where they have drawings that show the whole process from start to finish of a steel manufacturing plant. And then the text of the chapter covers all the different parts of it. I love these old books. They went to a lot of trouble. You can imagine how difficult it was to make books with these pullouts in it. And I'm just fascinated. And there's still a lot to learn because a lot of these things still apply. Surprisingly, what they learned in the old days, a lot of it is very applicable today. Here's an electric arc furnace, and this is from 1951. Still a method used today. And another nice bit in this book is the showing you like steel wire, what happens when you heat treat it. So there's hard drawn, and they've got it annealed at various temperatures, and they show the crystal structure of what it looks like as you anneal it at various temperatures up to 1200 Fahrenheit. And you can see that there's lots of small grains here. By the time you end up here, they're much bigger plates. And that affects how the material works. So if you want to understand that kind of stuff, this kind of book is good. This is a very old one. So if you want to read a modern book, you can do that as well. I just happen to really enjoy old books. Next up is following a different topic, right along the vein of processing of steel. And so you guys probably know about Stan Zinkowski over at Barzy Industrial, Shade on HKW for his YouTube channel, created those wonderful ovens that a lot of us have. That is sort of an infrared style oven. And this is an induction style oven. So the infrared oven, infrared and conducted heat energy eventually get to the part and heat it up from the outside in. Induction heating is passing a high frequency, relatively speaking, like 20 kilohertz, 100 kilohertz current through a piece of metal. And as the current flows through the metal, it meets resistance of the material and heats it up. And you directly heat the material, so it's much more efficient and quicker than other methods. This book shows you the things you need to do to make your own induction oven. Now, granted, it's a little outdated. They're using vacuum tubes here, but you can find more modern circuitry if you want. I thought this was a pretty interesting book because someday I'd like to make an induction oven as a project. Next up is a book on material science from the ASM people. That's the American Society of Metallurgists, I believe. And this is Metallurgy for the Non-Metallurgist. And if you're interested in more how metals get put together and how they change when you heat them and heat treat them, this is the book for you. It's reasonably well written. I got to tell you that a lot of the articles are written at sort of a higher level. I find that with a lot of the ASM books, they're written at a sort of a higher level that makes it a bit inaccessible. This one's for the non-metallurgist, so they don't cover a lot of the formulas involved with this sort of thing, but the article still can be a little inaccessible, I find, but the book has a lot of useful information in it. And last are two books on heat treating, and they're also by the ASM, but these are pretty well done books. And if you're looking for heat treating of specific materials, they basically have processes and formulas that well, not formulas, they have processes you can follow to heat treat specific metals that you're interested in. So they break up the section into all the individual steels. That's 4147, probably 4142, 4140. So we're in the 4140. So they show hardness versus tempering temperatures, cooling transform diagrams. So they get very technical, but you can use the basic information at home if you just want to be able to heat treat a part. So if you're interested in the topic of heat treating at home, here's two books that are pretty good for that. Next up is a book that I held for last because it's going to be a special deal here. This book is called Machine Tool Reconditioning. It's by Conley, and they still sell the book directly. You can find these on eBay for 150 bucks, or you can buy it straight from Conley or Machine Tool Publications for, I think, 100 bucks with shipping, plus shipping. So it's a lot cheaper to go direct. The people on eBay are making a tidy profit. This book covers machine tool repairs and metrology, and it's considered one of the books like the Moore book that's very useful as a sort of one of the fundamental reference books out there that you should know. It was originally printed in 1955. There's a reprint from 2013. This is a brand new copy of the book showing auto-collimating. They go into detail on scraping, metrology of machines, how to set up your tools to scrape, using levels appropriately, how and where you measure, what kind of wear, where you're going to find on machines and how to measure that, and then come up with approaches to fix it. This is a really good book, not heavy on beautiful color plates like the Moore books, but information rich. So it's a good book to have. And because I screwed up, I had bought this book a long time ago, and I ran across a YouTube video very recently talking about this book and forgot that I had ordered it. It was on my list of things to order, and I didn't know that I had. And so I ordered another brand new copy right here, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. So if you leave your name in the comments and say that you want this book, I will pick a number at random and find that comment number in the comments, and the person who gets that lucky number, I will be happy to ship you this book for free. This book is $100 and something book. So if you're interested in machine tool reconditioning, my big thank you for all those people that watch my videos and comments. I really appreciate you. And so I will send one of you this book for free. The rest of you, you can save money by not buying it on eBay or Amazon. Goes directly to the website of Machine Tool Publications and buy it directly. So as an outro, here's my wife's Pilates space, but also our library, and you can tell I really do enjoy books. And I only showed you some of my machining books. Here is several shelves full of machining books. This set of books I intend to digitize and make them available at some point in time. This is the whole sheet metal, I don't know, is it sheet metal union? Sheet metal and air conditioning industry. It's their training books for journeymen, and I bought these online a few years ago, and I want to digitize them so they don't get lost, all that information, and make them available. But anyways, just wanted to show you my love of books, and my wife's love of books is quite extensive. I have to get rid of books all the time because this is all the room we have for books. And computer books specifically, I've gotten rid of many shelves full. Anyways, thanks for watching, and don't forget to leave your name in the comments and a comment if you're interested in the machine tool reconditioning book, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.